back. I'm here with the fantastic panel. I have our special guest, Professor Robert Kerr. I have Odon LaFontaine, and of course, Paul Ellis. Paul is just completing his new book, which will be very interesting. We'd love to have him on to discuss that. Odon is completing his book as well, and we're going to be talking about that. Of course, Professor Kerr is a renowned international expert on, I believe it's ancient languages, and you have a fascination with the origins of Islam, as we do. But first, Paul, let's talk about your visit to the ICSA conference, I believe, before we get into the interpolations.
Yeah, I thought I'd just report back to you guys what I was up to in Vienna a couple of weeks ago. So the ICSA is the International Quran Studies Association. It consists of around about, I went through the directory, there's about 160 members, of whom it seems to me that the vast majority of them are professional academics, professors and so on. And but anyone can join, so I've joined, but I'm very much a minority as a lay person. And every year they have an annual conference. They tend to vary the conferences between being in Europe or being in America or the Americas. And so it was in London 2 years ago, and I went to that. And then it was in California last year. So I didn't go to that, but it was in Vienna this summer. So I was able to go to that, and I thought I'd just report back on what I found. So the conference lasted for about 4 days. 4 dates with 2 full days and 2 half days. And during the course of that, I attended approximately 50 talks, 20 minutes each. So they tend to come in panels. They'll have 4 or 5 people talking for about 1.5 hours. And then they'll have a break, and people can mingle, and then they'll do some more. So about 50. So it's quite heavy going. I didn't go to all of them, but I went to most of them. I wonder, is it possible to share my screen here? I've never done this before.
Yeah, on the bottom, click share, and then I recommend sharing your full screen. It tends to work better to do the entire screen than to just do a window.
Okay, if I do this, will it?
Yeah, select the window you want. Select the document.
Okay, what do I do now? I've
just
selected.
Share.
I've done entire screen. I've pressed a little button to green.
And then share. Have your document ready to show on the screen. Share that screen, and then click share.
Is that share at the bottom? Never works for me. I can't see what I meant to be sharing.
Share
the bit where it says share is grayed out.
Select. You have to select which screen. Click on the screen, the icon of the screen that you want. It'll say screen 1, screen 2, screen 3, whatever. Click that icon, and then the button will light up in white. Share. So select you'll have the.
Okay. I think so. Okay. Are you seeing this?
There we
you
go.
Should be seeing a schedule of the presentations.
There it is.
You see this?
Yep. Yeah, we're all seeing it.
So, my observation compared with 2 years ago is that the talks were getting more and more specialist and straying further and further away from the thing that I would be interested in, which is the exegesis of the Quran. So there were something like 80 odd talks here, but if I just go through the first 2 or 3, beyond inimitability, ijaz, the Quranic challenge and the ontology of texts, it would be one. The genealogy of Khalifa and its ethical horizons in Quranic exegesis, fertility rights between pre-Islamic South Arabia and the Quran, the Green Quran, deciphering the 7 Qur'at, color coding and letter symbols, and so on and so forth. I just wanted you to see just how precise, how specialist, but also how fairly unhelpful people's interests are. And so you can sit, as I did, for 4 days listening to these talks and learn very little of any usefulness about the Quran. And I think it's more extreme this time than it was when the conference was
probably
in London
deliberate
2 years ago.
To make it so narrow and so unuseful that people just tune out. And it's a lot of Muslims presenting on this.
I was going to ask, how apologetic was it and how critical was it?
There was only one. There were Muslim presenters, but there was only one who was going towards apologetics, and that was actually this gentleman. The status of the Quran in Taymiyyan Usul revival, and Ahmed Keita, and he was very much an Ibn Taymiyyah fan, and the person who gave a presentation after him chose a very liberal ecumenical sort of approach to interpreting the Quran, and he was staring. He was absolutely giving her the evils. It was quite. I got a distinct impression he would have been perfectly happy to take her out and behead her if their circumstances had permitted. So anyway, I just thought we can do other pages, but it doesn't get any more general than that. Of course, what I'm interested in is Jerusalem. That's my big thing. So I would generally try and discreetly get Jerusalem into any conversations. Jerusalem was only mentioned, as far as I could tell, in one of these talks, and that was a fairly precise talk on whether or not Mary menstruated whilst she was living in the temple, according to Quranic exegesis, the sort of thing that they were worried about back in the day. But what we talk about just simply is not discussed. It's not on their radar whatsoever. That was quite a good one about King Solomon's magic. That was probably, to me, the best talk of the whole week.
Yeah,
but there you go.
All of these topics have certain presuppositions embedded in them, that because you have to then assume the premises, whatever, that the Quran is historically accurate as the Sin presents it. So to argue their proposition, you need to assume that the premises are all solid. So basically, when you start to argue with them in circles on that little narrow point that they've made, you're assuming that everything is authentic on the source end, and we're attacking the source end, because this is all just distraction when the substance doesn't exist.
So one thing I was looking for is when I kind of mention the J word, is do I get any reaction from these people? Because I spoke to more than a dozen people, including some fairly well-known names within the area of Quranic exegesis. I don't want to get into naming them, but there are some quite big names there. And I would try and get in the reference to Jerusalem. I'm looking for any reaction. Are they shifty? Do they want to try and change the conversation? And they genuinely seem surprised. They never really thought about it much. They could be good liars, but I just get the impression that what we talk about isn't on their agenda at all. They're not thinking about it. They're not even thinking about the possibility of a grand narrative or an explanation. They are quite happy to burrow down within highly specialist areas that will never, you can do as many dots as you want, but you're never going to be able to link them all up. The other thing that I thought was a little bit interesting is that, with one exception, I don't think anybody there recognized me. One wonders if somebody, not that I'm a celebrity of any sort, but I have been around for a little while, and it's not impossible that one of them might have picked up on, oh, you're that guy. But nobody, only one person did. There's one academic who I think, I'm pretty sure, recognizes who I am and always avoids me. Always, if I try and join a conversation, that person will move away and make any interaction as short and so as possible. Well, that's fine. That's their prerogative. But generally speaking, I don't think they watch these videos. I don't think there's any interest there in trying to understand the Quran at all. And I think it's just remarkable.
I mean, I I thought of this one time as you've got these arguments they present, which tend to go in circles, but that's like a third tier issue where you're arguing about details, but at a higher level, you've got, is the logic that they applied sound, right? So because if they can get you trapped here, going in circles around these theological issues or whatever minor points, then you ignore the fact that the logic that's been applied is twisted, incorrect, or somehow flawed. However, at an even higher level, you can go one level up to and to the first tier, and you can say, hold on, but your whole historical premise is completely false. So,
Yes.
and then that just negates everything below that level. And I think we're trying to go to that first level and go, hold on, but if this is a false history, this is myth, then the logic you're applying is by default false, and then every argument below it is just is a useless point anyway. And they're trying to trap us here, and I'm trying to work up here.
Lloyd, if I could step in, even if it's all about myths and false history, I think some of these scholars might be even beyond the top tier. You just have to picture them as sort of acknowledging that the fate of billions of people depends on their studies, but they don't believe in it. They don't believe that God gave the Quran. So, what is their stance on religion and on Islam? I think for them, they picture themselves as being above the Muslims, because they have a better understanding of the falseness of their religion. So there is something very they are hypocrites in a way.
But also the scholars are considered have a very high level in Islam, and they are critical to guiding the ummah. So if you go into the Sharia, you find that the scholars are regarded with very high status. Yeah. So yeah, there's that. Yeah.
The same kind of logic can apply also to Islamic scholars. But I was talking about all these academics.
Yeah, but they're serving Allah, right? Well, they're not lying. Remember, there's the whole story of I wasn't lying about Muhammad. I was lying for Muhammad. They're doing that for the good of Islam.
How twisted it is to think that okay, Islam is good enough for you Muslims. And I acknowledge with my studies that it comes from Muhammad and so on, but there's nothing divine in it. I know it. But you are not good enough to share in my philosophical views or my own religious views. You see, there is something, there is a lot of scorn, or it's really an attitude that despises Muslims, I think.
Yes, there's a very strange sense about the place. If you're talking about something really refined and detailed, then you can have some kind of level of conversation. But if the conversation becomes too broad, it's almost like it's being rude. It's like you're being unsubtle. You're breaking the unwritten rules that you shouldn't really talk about it. I'm not sure I would say they're hypocrites and they're secretive, but it's an unwritten rule that they're not interested in any kind of meta narrative or thorough explanation. I mean, I think we all are fascinated by the Quran and what the truth of it is, and it's an intellectual puzzle, but there is also real world consequences. You know, when something like a quarter of the world's population, in one sense or another, live by the Quran, what it means is hugely important. And this lack of curiosity, lack of interest in the consequences or the potential consequences if anyone was to make any real progress.
But it's what keeps it alive. History will destroy it.
I find puzzling. I don't think it portrays the human race terribly well. That you got such a big issue, and you've only got 160 people around the world involved in Quran studies, of whom only about 20, 25 are actually active in terms of writing books and stuff. And yeah, and it just doesn't, it doesn't, and no one's interested in finding the answer. I don't think it's the human race that is finest, to be honest.
It'll harm them to find the answer. The historical method will destroy them. So they have a vested interest in that.
This is there's a excellent book. It's only in German though, but by Tilman Nagel, who was formerly professor in Göttingen. He's one of the interesting character. And but was ist der Islam Grundzüge einer Weltreligion? It was published about 10 years ago or more, maybe. But what is Islam? The basics of a world religion. And towards the end, he has a chapter where he is quite critical of the development that you're portraying about Islamic studies. And the argument he basically makes is that, in the 19th century, until World War I at least, the Islamic studies was part of Oriental philology, Oriental and Arabic philology. And that's when the critical studies were done, where we're just starting to pick up again over 100 years later. And one of his points is that especially so now with Islamic studies, you basically work with the premise there is no Islam, but everybody has their own Islam, and as you say in French, you shouldn't essentialize Islam and what have you. So as Odon said, to some extent, you basically take the basic narrative for granted, and it is a huge problem because, for example, if you look at biblical studies, so the Talmud is an important book and people should read it. And St. Jerome's commentaries are important, but if anybody was going to write a critical study on, I don't know, the date of the composition of the book of Exodus or something, nobody would base themselves on the Talmud, whatever its many merits are, and nobody would base themselves on St. Jerome's analysis. And in Islamic studies, it seems perfectly acceptable to refer to the Asbab an-Nuzul and assume the Meccan and Medinan surahs, which have no historical basis. And your point is valid, so I'm not going to doubt the sincerity or the intentions a priori of anybody who's speaking. I will say that it is a bit of a cul-de-sac, though, to, whatever interesting stuff you may find, it will not help us to understand the essential issues. So if the essential issue in, philosophy is what are humans, where do we come from, where are we going? Well, then the essential issue in biblical studies is where does the Bible come from? And in Quranic studies, it should be where does the Quran come from and how was it composed? Source critical analysis and what do you call that in English? Redactionskritik, redactional analysis, editing, history editing, or redaction, or what have you.
Yeah, but if they can trap you in the weeds, they can keep you arguing there in the weeds, but also then it keeps you from looking at the fact that there's an issue with their premises, their logic, but then they can trap you there as well if you do go up to that level. But this all keeps you from noticing that the whole forest is made of plastic.
Oh, yeah.
The trees are real,
But this is also a general trend, because if I remember correctly, the ICSA was founded around, I was actually a member back then, 2013 or something, 2012, if I remember correctly. And it came from the Society of Biblical Literature. It was an offshoot of that, if I remember correctly. But even if you look at the Society of Biblical Literature, it used to be interesting. You could do philological studies there, and now you have to do post-gender decolonial readings of, the French would love it, with Michel Foucault and Derrida, a Derridian analysis of the Book of Ruth or something. I don't know.
Well, for the benefit of the audience, I can come out as lesbian. I only sleep with women. So, we'll...
I just thought I'd report back on that. Just have a brief discussion.
Very interesting.
Well, Paul, have you been following ICSA for a long time?
Did you find it?
I joined ICSA before the London conference, which was 2 years ago.
Okay.
I've been there. I've been a member for 2 years, I guess. You do get access to their journals and articles, which is sometimes good. You can sometimes get useful
And
stuff
did you come across some interesting articles?
Yeah. They do have some. They do have some quite good ones, and I download them all. So if anyone wants any articles from the journal of ICSA, I can pass those on.
Okay.
But look, all of this is an attempt to avoid the historical method, a proper, solid historical critique, because that starts to shatter their foundations. And then any premise that derives from that is then null and void or inherently suspect.
Well, this is part of the problem. And, when Hawting was president, and I think he was one of the first presidents, and then Gabriel Said Reynolds was president, then it seemed to be there was at least some element of historical critical studies involved, but it seems to have gotten less, is my general impression. But
hey guys, sorry I'm late. Made it. This is good. So just a comment on what Paul, I just actually walked in, so I'm still trying to catch up. But what Paul said, I totally agree with the lack of enthusiasm from people to explore Islam when it is so important. I mean, if now we found something different about the story of Julius Caesar, we would go change the history books and no one would care. We would just start telling the story. But in the case of Islam, it really affects everything revolves around Muhammad, what he did, what he said, and people don't seem to really be very interested about saying, hey, hang on a minute, we need to see if
do we have a glitch?
Okay.
Okay.
Lloyd's fallen into the void and not come back.
Yes, Lloyd in name, only the name stands. So Paul, that's the thing. That people are they just seem to take the narrative completely as it's being told, and it's like, well, Muhammad said these things. It's like, no, hang on a minute, but there is an overwhelming amount of evidence that actually proves that all of those rulings, all of these things that every Muslim go and consult on a daily basis, it comes from caliphs. It doesn't come from one guy that had all of this information, but they seem to be quite unwilling to upset the status quo for some reason, when I think it's a lot of fun.
Well, JC, what you say is interesting by mentioning Julius Caesar, because you could make the comparison with Roman historians, Livius ab urbe condita, and Livius is good for things he's got sources on, let's say up until from the Third Punic War on, he's pretty well informed generally, but he of course you have to start at the beginning, so he starts with the tale of Romulus and Remus and the she-wolf, which is probably not so historically well sourced, let's say, as Julius Caesar. But the point you make is rather good, because in the 19th century, there was a German scholar, Theodor Mommsen. He later wrote a history of Rome, but, as a young scholar, he started out wanting to write a history of Rome. And he realized there was a huge problem with the sources. So what is the first thing he did? He went and systematized the Roman coins. And he found that there were apocryphal emperors, emperors who, according to the traditions, had reigned, but, there was no evidence for them. And then he went and he started this mammoth work, the Corpus Inscriptionum Latinarum, the corpus of Latin inscriptions, which is, it fills half a library, the thing. And he weeded out all of the forged inscriptions. It was in the Middle Ages and the early Renaissance. It was a favorite hobby to, for a certain amount of money, you could get an inscription showing that your family dated back to Romulus and Remus or something. Mm-hmm. And so he weeded all of those out using the philological method. So, for example, the Donum Constantini, the document that purports that Constantine, the emperor, gave Rome to the church. He showed, based on the philological method, it's a medieval forgery. And another thing, so first of all, before writing his history, he got his sources together. So he spent a lot of time, many decades. Then he eventually wrote his Römische Geschichte in 8 volumes, but only after, first of all, publishing and looking at the coins and the inscriptions to have sources. And this is part of the problem that we have in Islamic studies is, when I came to Islamic studies, coming from classics and biblical studies, nobody seems to have critical editions of anything. Nobody believes in critical editions of, even the Sirat or with Tabari's Tafsir, we only have 1 manuscript, but a historical comparative lexicon, like what you have for Latin or Greek or Hebrew, nobody sees the need for it, and nobody's willing to, if you try to propose a research project to get funded by the CNRS or Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft or something, saying, I want to do a critical edition of the Sirah or something. Well, no, there's no need. So, so we still use Wustenfeld's Arabic edition, even though there's other texts, and you see where this is going. Mm-hmm. So the big problem is that, the Germans started this in the 19th century. They were rather good, but then it came to a screeching halt with World War I, and there were also political developments. The Germans didn't want to upset the Ottomans too much because they needed them as an ally, and the whole affair of trying to get the Ottomans and the Sharif of the holy cities to declare a holy war against the French and the British soldiers who from the colonies and what have you. Mm-hmm. And it never really took off afterwards again until, let's say, until Wansbrough at least. Mm-hmm. But still, we need the critical editions of the text because, it's...
we don't even have translations into English of some pretty crucial texts.
Well, I don't see translations as important. I think as an Islamologist, one should know Arabic.
But, he's easier said than done. But there's an assumption that nobody would be interested, or maybe they don't think anyone should see them. So things like the Tafsir of Muqatil, which is the earliest Tafsir, mm-hmm. You could go online and you can find a dozen or more different editions of Ibn Kathir's tafsir, which is obviously centuries and centuries later. But the first one, which would be interesting to read, it's not there. It's never been translated into English. As an assumption, I wouldn't say to keep it secret, because you could buy an Arabic thing and you could learn to speak Arabic, but it's not exactly being publicized.
If I can jump in, just had a sort of a comment. Robert, you spoke about geopolitical constraints, starting with the maybe before the First World War, but there were other influences to prevent scholars from really actually studying Islam, and I'm referring to the case of Henri Lamas that you know of, Robert. He was.
He's my hero.
In 1910, I think, he published an article. He was a Jesuit priest. He published an article which is named Quran et Tradition, the Quran and tradition, in the within the Jesuit paper, magazine, journal, exactly, journal. And he almost had it all. He proved that the whole of the narrative was a sort of a forgery. It was not an historical narrative, but it had been designed in order to give an Islamic explanation to the Quran. So the Islamic narrative is not historical, it's an exegesis, actually, and a fake one. And thereafter, his superiors asked him to stop all of his critical studies on Islam. So he kept on with historical studies or studies on contemporary Islam, but it shows that there are ideological and maybe religious or philosophical influences that exert on Islamic studies. And some people don't want Islam to be dismantled or to be unveiled. Islam might be useful for some great interests,
but for a Muslim to question Islam is, of course, blasphemy. I just want to mention one thing, talking about fraud. This is the Ashifa, supposed to be the best biography of the Prophet Muhammad for over 800 years, right? And I mentioned this yesterday. I mean, these are issues that I would raise with Muslims. Like it says here, Muhammad asked Imam Ali to ensure that no one other than him should wash him, his covered body, after his death. He told him, no one has ever seen me naked. And if it were to happen, he would become blind. Now,
size does matter. Yeah.
Well, so one has to wonder about his wives, right? I mean, just as a basic question.
Just read the above. Lady Aisha said, I never saw the private parts of the Messenger of Allah.
Well, yeah, you can find this. I mean, this is one version of the other versions of this particular Ashifa. You'll find the same. Yeah, it is insane. So if we were to then press Muslim scholars on this, and they would end up having to admit they have no proof for this, and you'd say, so hold on, are you saying the entire narrative has been built fraudulently on tales like this? Then that would also destroy the credibility of how many hundreds or thousands of scholars over the years.
Well, you have in Brussels, you have the Bollandiste, which is a Catholic organization, and they have an amazing library, and if you can find a book anywhere, you go there. And but why did the Bollandiste come to be? And it was a bit in the tradition, but much before, of Henri Lamas, Quran et Tradition, comment fut écrit la biographie de Mohammed. How was the Quran and tradition, how is the biography of Muhammad composed? But what they did is they looked into the saints' lives, critical studies and see, which saints are actually saints, which ones actually lived, and which ones were invented, and which hagiographies of saints can claim some degree of authenticity, and which are, how should we say, largely works of fiction. And these critical studies, and as Odon rightly pointed out, Henri Lamens, but he wasn't the only one, was silenced by the church. And you even have this in the encyclica of Pope Francois, the Evangelium Gaudi, where he says he wants a dialogue with true Islam. I didn't read it in English, but it's what he said was translates into true Islam. I think it's about paragraph 258, which is nonviolent. So what is interesting here is that it's now apparently the Pope that decides what true Islam is. That would sort of like be asking, as Remy Bragg pointed out, asking the Dalai Lama to point out what true Christianity is.
Right.
So we have these incongruencies.
But all of this points to what Lloyd would say an upper tier ideologies that are beyond the church, beyond the scholars, that would claim that every philosophical view, every religion is equivalent. They are all the same. They are non-violent.
That's a heresy.
But it's heresy within the church. But still, it exists, and this is a kind of views that that controls. Like, for example, the scholars you listened to, Paul, when you went at this ICSA conference, and what's really, I would say, evil or really wrong with this is that it's not said openly. This kind of ideology is not written. There are no there are no people that put forth this kind of thought. It's all hidden, sort of.
With ICSA, I kind of have the impression it's a bit like the story of the emperor's new clothes, and Paul was the little boy.
Well, not on this occasion. The little boy is still marshalling his arguments. But yes, at some stage, the truth will out, and people are going to.
Well, I can give a. I won't mention any names, but oh, okay, good, yeah, okay, fair enough. That I have a friend who has he's now retired and has a good pension, so he has a lot of time and on his hands, and he signed up for a paper at ICSA, but they politely never responded to his submission. And I gave, we talked about his proposal, and I'd given them some suggestions. So maybe my bad reputation preceded me.
Mm-hmm.
But so it seems that to a certain extent that critical scholars are not too welcome. But this is how you keep something alive, and you talk about all kinds of other things, and you don't get to the essential. And I think the point is well taken, because what is the Quran? That is the question that we have to ask ourselves. Hello?
Oh, another technical issue.
Okay.
This happened again.
It looks like Jibril doesn't like this conversation. Yes, before we move on,
We've had no problems for weeks, and then suddenly it's back.
Yeah, on the technical or critical studies of the Quran, the thing is, we're doing these shows now with Lloyd. We'll probably do another one tomorrow about the sources of the Quran. It was written over 100 years ago, and people are rediscovering that now, like where they copied all of these things, and he got a lot right. So with Islam, there is this weird effect where something is established, everyone knows, but we continue as though we didn't know. I don't think there is a single person in the scholarly circles, unless they're Muslim, who will say the Quran has been preserved. But they don't really just get it like very clear to the public. Stop saying it's preserved, it's not preserved, and move on. It's almost like we all know it's not preserved, but let's let them believe whatever they want to believe. It's like they don't want to just set the record straight, and Islam just continues. The same thing happens with absolutely everything. When we had what is Yasir Qadi saying that the isnad, the chain of transmission in Islam, that is not taken seriously in scholarly circles, that just made Muslims say, nobody listen to Yasir Qadi because he's saying something we don't like. But it's like, but the scholars know that those things didn't happen. Scholars know that Moses never went to Mecca because it couldn't have happened. They know that Mecca wasn't there at the time of Abraham, but it's almost like everyone knows, but let's not talk about it because people will get upset. It's very, very odd when we are talking about history.
Well, but the point is that one has to understand that. So, for example, with as Nagel points out in the book that I just was Sister Islam, he points out that there's different people have or different cultures have different takes on things. So this whole notion of our notion of history developed. So everybody says Herodot is the first historian, but if you read the introduction to Herodot, he's a storyteller. He does in French you can say it histoire et histoire. He tells histoire, which is different from he tells stories, you'd have to say in English, and erzählt Geschichten und keine Geschichte, you would say in German. But the point being that this developed, and it was largely not to support anything, just from a historical point of view, that history is a chronological study. Well, you have a certain amount of it with the Greeks and the Romans, especially, but it's especially Christianity that was interested in this, with the Old and the New Testaments. But if you look at the Hadith, they first of all had to be have an oral tradition. They couldn't originally have been written. And the whole point of them is not to, it's like listening to a recitation of the Quran. It's to put yourself, transport yourself metaphysically to the period of Muhammad. So it's not, they have a different take of what texts are used for. So the idea, whether the isnads are historical or not, and that's not the point for them. They're not interested in history as we see it, and that's the part of the problem. So they take it as a given, and okay, exactly how it came to us, that's not the issue. Because you see this when hadiths are used, because so if you look at the hadiths, generally speaking, all of these peaceful hadiths that usually get cited when it's relevant, they're usually not the healthy ones, but some of the other ones that might be a bit more embarrassing have a better chain of, have a better isnad.
On this point, someone sent me this recently. Friend of mine, South African Debbie, based in the US. I mean, number of manuscripts for ancient works, and I mean the Bible is the single most, the best attested ancient work in history. And no one questions the authenticity of the Iliad, which has, what, 5 copies? 6? I don't know what it is. I mean, no, okay, 1900. No, but which one has like 5 or 6 copies that no one questions? Pliny the Younger and Tacitus Annals, 36, but there was one for, how many copies are there of the Odyssey?
One of the most famous ones and most influential ones is Tacitus's Germania, which had a huge influence all the way up to the Third Reich, which is interesting because, but there's only one copy there, and it's now in Italy. It was in Heidelberg, and it got kidnapped or booknapped or whatever you want to call it. It was an amazing story in the Middle Ages, but the point being, but this is where critical philology is important, because when you read, text of the, if the Iliad, well, if you know Homeric Greek, then you see, because we have an overview of the history of Greek, we can tell approximately when a Greek text was written and by whom. Well, not that I'm saying that Homer ever existed, but with the Iliad, the last 4 books are clearly apocryphal. It just gives the happy ending everybody wants, and nobody says they're authentic. And this is where the thing is, where codicology becomes very important, because that now that you mentioned Homer, we've got the popular recensions of Homer, and we've got the academic recensions of Homer, from the Alexandrine Library. So we can tell that, and so with philology, you can do a lot to posit, spurious texts and what have you.
Well,
but this is the problem. This still needs to develop for Quranic studies.
Well, my thought was that I think it was Alexander the Great I was thinking of. The writings on him amount to maybe 5, 6 documents. No one questions his existence, but we've only got a handful, literally a tiny handful of documents attesting him. The Bible is questioned ad nauseum, and we've got like 30,000 plus documents on it, right? Going back 2,000 plus years. And the Quran doesn't even feature here. There's basically 0 ancient Qurans that we can really talk about, and yet the Quran must not be questioned. It is not questioned. I mean, that's a double standard. That's a serious double standard. Glaring.
Yes, and with Islam, there is this thing that they have done, which I think it filters through the whole ideology, which is they cannot question anything, because the moment they do that, they realize the whole thing is incredibly false. So Muslims are really forced to say things that are contradictory. For example, that the Quran is the word of God and it has only one meaning. It is very clear. But then when you go to the interpretations of those verses, you will have people just writing stories about those verses. They don't know the meaning. So if they only saw that, they will see, okay, so it's supposed to be very clear word of Allah, but the scholars have no idea the meaning of the verse, therefore this is not from God. So they have to prevent them from first reading those things. And secondly, for those who do, they have to make them still be compliant to Islam and say, no, the consensus will be this one, so we ignore the others, despite of saying that everybody had multiple opinions. So they have to be forced not to explore and to accept, perhaps under threat or whatever it may be, in order for them to stay in it. It's really bizarre.
Well, if you can just pull up the table again, Lloyd, that you just showed.
Give me one moment. There you go.
So the interesting thing about these, that all of these texts have basically critical editions, even the ones that have a few manuscripts and what have you. Because
can you define what a critical edition is, please, just so that we're all clear on that?
Okay, a critical edition. Well, there are 2 types of a critical edition. There's one where you present a text and you give in the apparatus the variant readings, which is, for example, what you have for the Old Testament and for Homer and things like that. And then you've got the that's the diplomatic edition, and then you have an eclectic edition, is, for example, what you have for the New Testament, where if you look at the Nestle Aland United Bible Society's critical edition of the New Testament, what's presented in the main text, maybe you can see if I can find a copy just to show what a critical edition is.
I meant just a brief explanation for the audience, just like a summary.
So where you try to present the text, what you think is the most original text. One second.
The most authentic version of the source text based on a cumulative review of all the rest. So you think you're finding out?
1 second. I'll just share a screen here. So how does that work? Partager. Voila. That's a page from the Biblia Hebraica, where you have the variant readings and footnotes at the bottom. And I'll just find the New Testament. So the difference is with the New Testament, the text given in the main text is not necessarily a text that ever existed, but it's seen by the editors to be the closest to the original they can get, which may or may not be arbitrary.
No, that's fine. Yeah, great.
Good. So this is the New Testament, and there you have the variant readings at the bottom of the pages and from all the different manuscripts. So you try to, the idea is to, with a critical edition, try to establish the oldest, most reliable version of the text. And you do, as I said, there's two main ways, the diplomatic and the eclectic editions, but in both you give the variant readings, which until now has never been done for the Quran. In how much this is based on what we have is hard to know, because we can't date the earliest manuscripts. So C14 doesn't work for fine dating of manuscripts. And we saw this, for example, with the Birmingham Codex about 10 years ago, which made this big hype. And the dating of it was from 550 to 650, but people don't realize that carbon-14 datings give a statistical probability. So, i.e. 600 is the most probable date, and then it diminishes on both sides to 550 and 650, and anything earlier or later becomes a statistical improbability. Can't be entirely excluded, but the point is that we then have a Quran codex which dates to 600, which would be before Muhammad became a prophet according to the traditional account. But what you saw with Muslims, what they all did, is they said, oh, this is interesting. See, we like science. It shows that the Quran was written earlier than we thought. Because if the prophet died in 632, so everybody said, so we combine science with Islamic traditions. So this text probably dates from 640 and 650. And you're going, but this is not how you cannot abuse carbon-14 dating in such a fashion. It's so the chances of it being 640 are much less than it being 600 by an exponential amount, because it doubles in each.
Yeah. I just did a presentation in the last NAPC conference in London Well, I mentioned this carbon dating method as being not very precise, because there are too many parameters at play.
Well, what is interesting there? No, there are too many parameters in play with this, and what you see is that. So, if you look at archaeology, for example, if you want to see, if something old dates from the Paleolithic or the Neolithic, then carbon-14 is good.
Yeah.
But one of the first things that was dated with carbon-14 were actually the Qumran manuscripts, because they were just discovered shortly after the C14 dating. But there the debate was, are the Qumran texts from the Middle Ages or from antiquity?
Mm-hmm.
So there you can use carbon-14 dating.
That's relevant.
But even nowadays, for example, we know the community that was behind the Qumran text, and we know a bit about it, and it was founded in the 2nd century BC and lasted until 70, when the Romans destroyed it on their way to take Jerusalem. But the carbon-14 dates make the text 100 years older than the community. And you see this, for example, with Old Norse text from Iceland, the Viking sagas and what have you in Old Norse. And the carbon-14 dating, so they're about 100 years older, which makes the text older than the discovery of Iceland by the Vikings.
Yeah, but it all depends on parameters. You know the method, Robert. It works with comparison. You compare the amount of C14 in the text you want to date. You compare it with a standard manuscript that you know exactly the datation. Yeah. And if you want to date for example, the Birmingham Quran or the Birmingham Folios, you need to have a standard, another text, another manuscript, a standard manuscript from around the same time that has been made with the skin of the same animal that would have been bred in the same conditions, in the same territories, with the same climate, with the same food, and all these parameters are impossible to match. And so you cannot get a precise carbon dating of a manuscript.
It's not a tool by which you can date manuscript. But of course, I read after Birmingham, where that some smart Alec then proposed the most interesting theory I've heard. It's totally ludicrous. He says, well, maybe they slaughtered a lot of sheep to make parchment, and they kept it stored, and the Arabs conquered this stockpile. And you're going, well, it's like leather today. It's usually a byproduct of slaughtering animals for food, and you use the skin. And it's not that you slaughter herds of sheep just to have parchment for manuscripts. And the idea that you kept them stored,
maybe.
Well, prove it, first of all. You have to prove it happened. It's a rather humorous proposal.
Well, if there is one thing that we learned from the last presentation from Odon is that in Mecca they have lots and lots of sheep, so they could afford it.
Oh yeah, of course, yes, and they knew the Prophet was going to come, so they stockpiled. Yes.
Yeah, but the thing is, we are talking about ancient Quranic manuscripts or fragments, and we have some of them where I would refer to yesterday's presentation. We have some of them where the Muhammad mention is absent. In the Sana manuscript, for example, the famous palimpsest, there is one mention to Muhammad that is absent. In another manuscript that was in the famous UNESCO CD-ROM from 1995, There is also, I think it's verse 29 from Surah 48 that is missing. So you see, some Muslims brag about ancient manuscripts, but they don't even read them.
No, well, it's part of the problem, because I saw recently a Persian edition of an old manuscript. I think it's from the 10th century or 9th century in Persia. And what the bloke did was he gave a facsimile photographs on the left-hand page. On the right-hand page, he gave the Cairo Quran and said, see, they're both the same. Well, you just have to look at the manuscript and you see the orthography is quite different. But of course, the idea is that nobody can read the old orthography or the old Arabic handwriting. It's a bit different.
Is this the Mashhad Codex?
Yeah, I think it's that one, yes.
You know, Dan Brubaker, I met him in London, and he's about to publish a book on the corrections within this codex. So even this codex is not, it has been tampered with.
Corrected, which is of course not tampered with. Well, I mean, we see this with ancient texts. I mean, also biblical manuscripts, they're corrected. You know, you have this famous case of one of the New Testament manuscripts. I can't remember the passage, but it's a hapax in the New Testament, and various copies have, you know, deleted it, and then somebody wrote in Latin, just copy what's there.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Please.
what I mean is corrections to manuscripts. We have this all the time, and we can see this, for example, with the Hebrew Bible quite clearly, that sometimes commentaries have entered the text of the Hebrew Bible. You know what? But the point is that you have to study these with, you know, the variant readings and take them seriously. And indeed, this is what's lacking in Quranic studies. You know, something, and it becomes a vicious circle, because, yeah, we don't need that, and the fact that we don't need it proves that there's nothing to see. Therefore, that's why we don't need it, and the circle keeps turning. And this is the huge problem that we have.
Yeah.
Of course, the Quran text goes back to a point when the Quran would have been canonized. But we know from reading it, it's obvious that some bits have been added, some bits have been moved around, some bits were originally 2 surahs and they're now 1 surah, or there used to be 1 surah, they're now 2 surahs. And we know that it came about as a process of editing. So what we really need to know is what it looked like before it was canonized.
Yeah, there's still the excellent book by Pohlmann, Die Entstehung des Korans, in German, but so he was a Old Testament scholar who in his retirement started to work on the Quran, and he applied the historical critical tools of the biblical studies of the text of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish Bible, to the Quran, and he's shown, it was, as you were saying, Paul, how the compositional history of the Quran and how it came about, and it's been clearly edited, and he proposes 4 or 5 stages, and the last 2 are Islamic. The Quran has been Islamified. Yeah, and not to mention it wasn't even dotted. Yeah, well, there's actually a funny story about that in Tabari. That apparently he says the Quran was originally written down with diacritics, but then they were removed so that everybody could read the Quran in their own dialect, which is a rather unique take on the matter. and then they were later added again.
Have you gentlemen considered the actual name of the book being Quran? Yes, because the earliest sources that we have outside of the narrative, one being John of Damascus, whether the date is right or wrong, he doesn't call it Quran, he says a book. And then we have Leo III saying, calling it Furqan, as opposed to Quran, and it's only probably in the 9th century that we have sources that calls it the Quran. Do you think that it was called Quran from day one, or it was something that happened as they invented the Islam?
No, because it's clearly, I would say it's clearly something else that's referred to in the Quran. It's not the Quran.
Yeah, JC, you remember we had a presentation, The Quran is not the Quran, where I went through all mentions of the word Quran in the Quran. And if you look at all these mentions, you realize it's not about the Islamic Quran, it's about a lectionary, an Arabic lectionary. And so the invention of the name Quran for the Islamic book, it must have come at a later stage. At first, it was all about an Arabic lectionary, which is not the Islamic Quran, which was another book. And thereafter, when Islam was sort of processed or invented, they chose the name Quran to name the book, the holy book, because it is so oftenly repeated within the text that it can make sense. It can make sense. Within the Quran, there are mentions of an Arabic lectionary that is presented as being a divine scripture, a sort of revelation, the first book that is given in Arabic to the Arabs. And it's quite easy to understand, because a lectionary is a collection of excerpts from sacred scriptures. So in a sense, it's a divine revelation, but it's not the Islamic Quran, it's something else.
Yes, that's that I would agree with that. So it's clearly Kiryana. We've discussed this, I think, when we discussed the Syriac word. It clearly comes from Kiryana in Syriac.
Right. So for the benefit of the audience, so what you are saying is that if you took a time travel machine and you went back to, for example, the year 670, and you went to your local bookstore and you said, "Hey, can I have the Quran?" They would give you a completely different book.
Yeah. Basically, I'd probably give you the Bible, I would say.
You go to an Arab bookstore with Arabic books, and you ask for a Quran, and they might give you the Arabic lectionary.
Correct.
Or an Aramaic one, but
so Quran becoming this book is part of the process that Professor Kerr mentioned a moment ago. One of the last stages when they are Islamizing the whole thing, and they are creating their own meaning to things, such as, well, that, the night journey, and everything else, making it Islamic.
Yeah, it's part of the same manipulation of key terms within the Quran. So Quran within the Quran became the Islamic book. Nasara became Christian. Safa and Marwa in Jerusalem became Safa and Marwa in Mecca, and so on. There is a big manipulation process that changed the meaning of the words within the Quran.
And I think it seems quite likely to me that the surahs were originally circulating individually, or possibly as part of smaller collections. So, for example, one of the commentators, Ower 8, points out that John of Damascus talked about 4 surahs, of which 3 of which we know, and one of which is the Camel of God, which we don't know, and he gives some information about it. it makes no sense that John of Damascus would have invented this. If he wants to criticize a religion, he wants to criticize the actual religion. He doesn't want to invent something that the guy didn't say, that isn't there. So there's very likely these surahs were circulating, and we don't have all of them. Also, it occurs to me that there's, in the Dome of the Rock, there's what looks like a verse from the Quran to the untrained eye that appears on both the outer ambulatory and also the inner ambulatory. But it's not found in the Quran. It's a compilation of two different parts of the Quran. I think it's parts of 64:1 and 57:2, and the two of them are put together, but they're put together twice, once on the outside and once on the inside. So it seems overwhelmingly likely that whoever made that inscription thought that that was what the verse was, and they're probably right. That probably was what the verse originally was, and then sooner or later, when Tabit was putting his Quran together out of bits of bone and palm stalks, the memories of men, he found these two excerpts and put them together in a different way. So having even if someone could persuade me that the Quran is perfectly preserved back from the time of its canonization, that's quite late. What I want to know is what it looked like before then, and that's going to be a heck of a task to try and unpick.
No.
Yeah, I agree. And you always have this, but you often also have this in the Islamic tradition with, for example, Abdullah ibn Sa'ad ibn Abi Sarih, where according to Al-Athir and Tabari, he determined that Muhammad had no idea what he was being revealed, or what he said he revealed, and that he changed the text, and that he said that the Quran was a fabrication and not a divine revelation. So he had the same nursemaid as Uthman ibn Affan. So Uthman asked, according to the Islamic tradition, Muhammad to spare him, which he did, and he later became the governor of Egypt, according to the Islamic tradition. But so you even have this in the Islamic tradition, that there are people that claim Muhammad was making it up as he went along. So what you do point out is rather good, is good with the what do you call that in English? In the inner and the outer rotunda of the Dome of the Rock.
The walkways, ambulatory is too difficult for me. So the inner and the outer walkways, the clockwise and the anti-clockwise.
Voila. The point being that there are three things you can do with those texts. So some of the texts are found in the Quran, but they're not found together. So my predecessor Oleg pointed out that they probably make more sense the way they are rendered in the Dome of the Rock than how they are scattered throughout the Quran. But the point is, there are three possibilities if you look at this text critically. So one of them is that they are indeed quotes from the Quran, but you then first of all have to prove that when these texts were composed, the Quran was already in circulation, written. Or B, you could make the argument that the Quran borrowed these texts from the Dome of the Rock, and somebody got the filing cards mixed up. Or you could say they both drew on a common source. So based on the evidence we have, I'm not sure we could, I would want to bet too much money on the first option.
And it's not just those. There's also, you've also got the brass plaques, which again, it's the Quran, but it's not as we know it. It's about 1/4 of it appears in the Quran, but interspersed with plenty of things that look Quranish but aren't actually in the Quran. So it's very.
So I would say the point is, like with the old manuscripts, good, they're all fragments of Qurans, but I would still presume that they are Quran. So when you, in some way, shape, or form. So what you see in Sunnah is that some of the Sunnah manuscripts, they have a different sequence of surahs. So the surahs were set out, but I assume they to how much of the Quran we don't know, but basically there was a notion of the Quran, because otherwise you probably wouldn't copy copy the text. So when you find, just a fragment of the Gospel of John on papyrus, people assume that it belongs to the rest of there was a rest of the Gospel of John, and it is just not a logia of Christ floating around.
So, in terms of the Gospel of John, I've been watching some very interesting new developments in that, and the date of the Gospel of John, I mean, obviously people try to make it that it was written in 3000 AD or something, and push the date out as far. Yeah, I'm exaggerating, but anyway, it was pushed out to 120, 150, depending who you asked. I mean, obviously they wanted to have it written in 1953, right? But it now seems that it legitimately could well have been written in about 68, 66, 67. So there's legitimate reason to think it was written in the mid-60s.
Way before Lloyd.
Yeah, I mean, I did an extensive analysis based on the Didache, which shows that I think it's the Gospel of Mark could well have been written. I mean, you're looking at as the 50s, 51, 52. So the age of the Gospels is becoming earlier and earlier and earlier. I mean, look, we could say it was written 3 weeks after Jesus ascended, right? But I mean, based on what is reasonable assumption, at least that people are willing to accept.
I'd go early in the second half of the second century. That would be my.
Yeah, but no, I've seen some very good reasons.
The first century, I mean, just
for John not later than the 60s, mid to late 60s, prior to the destruction of the temple. So John prior.
Lloyd, if you read the book of Acts, you see Peter and John standing trial before the Sanhedrin, the council of the elders, the Jewish elders. And so John is already giving his testimony, not that far from 3 weeks after Jesus' crucifixion. So parts of his testimony were already there in the very, very first time of early Christianity.
But nobody's going to doubt that. But to have a fully fledged composed gospel, let's just say, I don't think we should hair split dates, but I think the serious Communis Opinio would put them in the early second half.
Yeah, I mean, so we've gone from 190 to 120. We've dropped 30 years at least to 65.
I would go for 47, Robert. 47.
I mean, John, like all the Gospels, anticipates the destruction of the temple.
Yeah.
So it's possible that if there might be a religious interpretation that you think, oh well, Jesus actually prophesied the destruction of the temple, and that's how they wrote it. You could say, well, he kind of, a bit like Proto Isaiah, he kind of sensed it was coming and tried to get ahead of the game. Yeah. But to me, it seems more likely that all these Gospels were written after the destruction of the temple. It's a bit ambitious to start writing it down before it's happened.
Instead of arguing about dates, one might just merely point out that, at least with the Gospels, we've got something to debate about. You know, for example, the destruction of the temple, which I think is a valid indicator. You know, so all of Bultmann's learned scholarship, but I think he missed the boat with his Gnosticism.
I don't think he was trying to be sincere. But my point was that the Gospel is moving earlier, whereas the Quran is moving later. The more you investigate the Quran, the later it gets. The more you investigate the Gospels, the earlier they get.
Yeah,
of course, some parts of the Gospels might be early, and then they were added to. And so the question is, when did they canonize it? When did it become? Canonize is a confusing term there, but when was the Gospel finished? But the when the Gospel was finished doesn't necessarily when it was started. Some parts of it may well be very old.
Yeah. But so the and one of the important things to remember also with the table you showed earlier, Lloyd, is that, for example, we know with classical texts, there are some people that say, yeah, but the oldest letters of Cicero, they're only preserved in a 15th century manuscript or something. Therefore, how do we know that some crazy monk didn't write that? Well, this is where philology comes into play, because we know how monks in the Middle Ages tried to write Latin. It usually wasn't very successful. My Latin teacher would have lynched us if we'd written like that. So you can date texts, so if somebody tries to imitate Shakespearean English, you see they're pretending. And we have these famous cases of forgery, and not forgery might be too big a word, but from ancient Egypt and also from Mesopotamia. So one is from the time of Nabonidus, who we know had an archaeological interest and said in one of his texts that he dug up texts from before the flood. But it floods all the time in Mesopotamia, so that might not be so dramatic. But the point was, you have a text there from the temple, the Kubabar at Sippar, where they, of course, saying, okay, we've got this King Nabonidus, and so he's the successor of Nebuchadnezzar, known from the Daniel book. But so he's got an interest in the guy that went to Arabia, to Taima, for 13 years. But he's got an interest in archaeology. So they came up with a text that they'd tried to write in Old Babylonian, archaicized, saying that their temple should be tax-free for all of eternity. So, people were trying to get away from paying taxes in those days too. And the interesting thing is, you see, when you read the text, they made some mistakes. They did a very good job. They got, 95% of it right, but there's a few neologisms that slip in, and because it's Mesopotamia, and they wrote on clay, and clay gets preserved, we actually found the original text that was written in the contemporary language, which they gave to a scribe to archaicize. So, but the point being that with the Quran, we have nothing to go on, because it's, by all accounts, the first Arabic book. It's not the oldest Arabic, but and the other thing I was going to say is that we have quotations. So, for example, for Cicero's letters and many classical texts, we have quotations from other texts. Cicero quotes Greek plays, and also for the New Testament, for example, one of the important sources are the letters of the Church Fathers and the liturgies, the old liturgical books. But we have none of that for the Quran.
No. And the question remains, are the inscriptions of the Dome of the Rock quotations from the Quran, or do they come from a common source?
Yeah.
Yes. Somebody, how big 317 was asking. By the way, I noticed we've been joined by somebody called Hussein.
Hussein, hey, hi there. How are you doing?
Hello, how are you? Yeah, just I used to do a program with a priest named Father Zechariah Butros. He's a famous Coptic priest who does programs about Islam. And one of the programs that I was really intrigued with was about the alleged magic donkey ride from Mecca to Jerusalem, and where Muhammad went to alleged Al-Aqsa Mosque. And of course, what they were saying is that Al-Aqsa, there was an Al-Aqsa Mosque in a city called Jordana, very close to Mecca, that Muhammad often frequented. So it wasn't Al-Aqsa Jerusalem, but Al-Aqsa in Arabia there. But one of the things that it was a huge topic that covered several weeks. But one of the things that I found interesting, and it kind of piqued my interest when what Paul was saying was about, first of all, there was no Al-Aqsa or Dome of the Rock at the time of Muhammad's alleged donkey ride, the magic donkey ride. That the Al-Aqsa Mosque was built by Abdul Malik, like in around 690, whereas Muhammad died, 630. And so they were saying there that Abdul Malik was actually trying, because there was a competition between him and the caliph in Mecca, who I believe was Zubair. His name is Abdullah Zubair. I believe that I may have that wrong, and so in order to get Muslims focused on Jerusalem as a potential pilgrimage site in place of Mecca, he built the Dome of the Rock to attract the Muslims, to get them to start doing pilgrimage in Jerusalem instead of Mecca. And and that also, with that, there's the element of wanting to have a religion he was Umayyad, I believe, and wanting to have a religion that would unite the Arabs. And so I just was interested if you heard stuff like that, if you what your thought is about that.
Well, I think if you look at it with the source critical studies, so how much firsthand stuff do we have of the Umayyads by the Umayyads? So most of it comes later. I mean, so one of the criticisms, so they're Abbasids, and Abbasids, of course, they have to legitimize their rule. And they do that by usually not saying too nice things about the Umayyads. And one of the criticisms of against Abdul Malik is for building the Dome of the Rock, because it would detract pilgrims away from Mecca. And I think this is one of the reasons why we have this embellished story about Ibn al-Zubayr taking Mecca, to give a reason why the Dome of the Rock was built, which was, of course, because this creates also problems. It means, so how long was Mecca occupied by Ibn Zubayr? Not that long, but so all of a sudden he says we need a speed building program to build this thing. It has to be done in 2 weeks. Well, exaggerating, but you get the impression. So I think, yeah, and we discussed the Burak thing a couple of things ago. You find it in the Talmud in Sanhedrin 98a it's Burak is just the Middle Persian word for horse, which was interpreted later as the name of the horse, because it's in the Aramaic of the Talmuds, it's Susa Baraka. And yeah, I don't know if you want to pull that up again, Lloyd.
Yeah, curious thing about that as well, I find it, is that you would expect that any story would have the important details of what happened during the story. Yet in the verse that they used for the night journey, there is no mention of the Burak, which certainly would be mentioned in there. It would have the whole thing.
If it had been known, and also if the ascent to heaven had been known, the Miraj or the Isra, well, the Miraj, yeah. They would have probably have mentioned it, because it would have. But there is a book by a German scholar, Hartmann. 1 second, I can just.
Sanhedrin 98A. By the way, guys, Hussein is a friend of Usama's. He's a friend of the channel. He's been on with me several times in the past. And he's very well known in the apologetic scene in the US. Iraqi, I believe, right, Hussein?
Palestinian.
There you go. Yeah. So, and he understands Islam, and he understands the apologetic scene very, very well. So.
Okay, and it's 14.
14.
Sorry. No, 98A 14. If you just.
Oh, my bad. Sorry. Let me find that again. That went out. Where is 14? There we go.
Oh yeah. So they're discussing when the Messiah comes, and there we have Amar le Shabur Malka Shmuel. Okay, so all Persian kings are called Shapur in the Talmud. It's a bit like Pharaoh in the Old Testament, or Negus for the king of Ethiopia in the Islamic tradition. Amritu Mashiach al Chamra Athi Ishdar le Susya Barka de Ithri. So the king Shabur said to Samuel, markingly, you see the Messiah will come on a donkey. So of course what he's saying is, if he's your king, he should come on a horse, because that's royalty. And so he says, yeah, here's my portable number. You can call me 24/7. And when he comes, I'll give him a horse. And you see what they say, a riding horse, but you see in the beginning, the right hand of the second line, it says Susya Barka. And you find this often in the Talmud, that they throw in a Persian word just so that people see that Shapur is actually talking Persian. And Barka is the Middle Persian word for horse, and this is where Burak comes from.
Right. Mel's here. Mel, please join us. I've dropped the link in the chat. I will send it to you now if you'd like to jump in with us.
I comment on Hussein's question about, or point about the story of Abdul Malik building the Dome of the Rock as a substitute shrine for Mecca. I don't think that makes any sense in the traditional narrative. In the way that the story is told, I don't think it makes any sense. The Umayyads had been fighting this war for something like 10 years by this stage, or a very long time, hadn't they? The Battle of Karbala was at 680, and it had been going on for a heck of a long time, this fighting this war. And by all accounts, Abdul Malik was successful, and he won the war round about 692, give or take. And so he was on the cusp of victory. I don't see why somebody who is fighting a war, wants to win a war, I don't see why he would divert his resources away from the war fighting to go and build a huge, obviously very expensive monument in Jerusalem that would advertise to everybody that he'd given up any hope of winning, and he then wanted to build a substitute shrine because he'd given up. He's never going to capture Mecca, because he actually did capture Mecca like the year before or something thereabouts.
Well, then
if I could I ask you just a question? You know, the thing that really piqued my interest about what you said is about the actual inscriptions on the Dome of the Rock, the verses. You said 57 or 60. I have it written down here, but are you saying that those verses existed before the Quran?
I think. Well, to the question of what do you mean by the Quran, I see at least two things, two strands, the way I would say. On the one hand, you've got the Umayyads, who don't seem to think much of Muhammad, the historical guy, but they do seem to buy into his religious message. So the Umayyads build the Dome of the Rock, they build the Dome of the Chain, they've got the gatehouse that's oriented to the Chapel of the Ascension up on the Mount of Olives, and they decorate this with pictures that seem to depict passages from the Quran. So they seem very tied into what the Quran eventually says. It's the idea that Jesus is going to come down on the Mount of Olives, going to go across from Safa to Marwa, go across the Kidron Valley, go into the Temple Mount by the gatehouse, by the Golden Gate, go up the stairs, go into the Dome of the Rock, sit over the rock, be enthroned, take dominion of the earth, and then come out and sit into the Dome of the Chain, and then judge the whole of humanity that's then been gathered on the great plain of judgment outside. It seems to me that is what the Dome of the Rock complex is all about, and that's broadly in keeping with what the Quran tells us is going to happen. And they got rather nice touches. Some of the decorations inside the inner drum of the dome have got Sasanian crowns, which ties in with the idea of paradise as a Persian garden. I think so. I see this as being broadly in favor of the place that the Quran eventually ends up with. But the Umayyads don't have the canonical text, or if they do have it, they don't accept it as a canonical text. So they use language that is Quranish or Quranesque, but it's not actual direct quotes, at least on the outside, because on the outside ambulatory, there's very little that is actually Quranic. They've got about I think 5 or 6 different types of shahada, none of which actually appear in the Quran. But when you get into the internal walkway, then it's almost completely Quranic. So it looks to me like when they were building it, and the mosaic techniques, there's a book by a guy called Marcus, is it Marcus? I'm not sure about the first name, but somebody Millwright, and he talks, the whole book is on the Dome of the Rock. Is it Marcus?
Marcus Millwright.
Yeah, and the whole, and he points out that the mosaic work is much more sophisticated on the inside than it is on the outside. So on the outside, the text has a standard 5 tiles, whether it's horizontal or vertical line. It's always 5 tiles wide, whereas on the inside, it's more elegant because the horizontal line is just 3 lines, and then you save the 5 lines for the ones that are the lines that are more hard and more important to pick out. So, long story short, the outside verses which are not canonical, which are Quranish but not canonical, seem to be done when the style of mosaic making is rather rudimentary, and when they perfect it on the inside, it becomes more canonical. So my assumption is when they started building this thing, they were in tune with the Quran's message that the Messiah is going to come to Jerusalem, and you need to build, and you're going to judge everyone, is going to be enthroned, and is going to be linked to paradise. That's all there. But meanwhile, somewhere else, quite possibly in Yathrib, somebody is putting together the canonical Quran that we know today, and this wasn't available to the Umayyads. And the canonical Quran is the one that the legend of Muhammad, all these stories that are so easy to pick apart, many of them seem to be there to explain the text of the Quran. So whoever is making up these stories is creating an entirely false narrative based upon the text of the Quran. So the people who are true, the Umayyads who are truer to its message, don't have the canonical text. The people who have the canonical text don't seem to recognize that Jerusalem plays any role at all. So that's in broad.
Well, you could make the argument, and I would say that, you know, there's nothing to say that the inner and the outer text were necessarily written at the same time, but the problem there is that mosaic making was, you know, since the 6th century, it had reached its flourish, at least. And what you could say that making mosaics with Arabic script was something new. That they initially had problems gauging that you could say, but the point being, what was I going to say? With the canonical text, I think one should look with the. There's a difference between the canonical text and the canonical text, let's say an authoritative text, because if one looks, for example, in the church history of Eusebius, you know, there is no canonical New Testament yet as such, or they're debating the books of the Bible still, but there are authoritative texts. So what I mean is this is a part of a drawn-out process before a text becomes canonicized, and I'm not sure that the canonical text is the right term for the Quran, because that is largely, you know, Christians with their synods and what have you, and they decree what's canonical and which books become part of the canon and not. And as far as I know, for the Quran, we don't really have that.
No, when I say canonical text, what I mean is the text that we now regard, or Muslims now regard as canonical. Whether it was regarded as canonical at the time, well, I would say somebody thought it was canonical because somebody was producing these, and then other people were trying to make up stories to explain the text that they had they didn't understand. Yeah. And that is now the Quran that has survived, and that's what everyone regards as the canonical Quran.
Okay, but I think there are two things there too, because there is one thing to have the text and the other interpretation of the text. So I think you could make an argument based on the evidence that we have that the Quran is much older.
Some parts of it, yeah, but not as homogeneous religious writing.
Yeah, the parts of it. Yes, you're correct. Thank you.
Question: does the Dome of the Rock have the dots? Just a yes or no here.
I think the answer on the inside, not the outside.
On the inside,
okay, that's not
exactly.
Yeah, Hussein, I have a question for you. I mean, you're very active in the apologetic sphere. And so you use a lot of data to debate and to talk with Muslims and Christians. So how is this information? I mean, we are doing some fairly cutting edge kind of debate discussion. Well, I would say more discussion and analysis, research, hypothesizing. How does this help you, and how do you think it helps the broader apologetics community? Because we're not really stuck on the standard narrative here. We're like pioneering. So how does this help? Your thoughts on that would be interesting.
Well, you know, the whole topic of the Dome of the Rock is, especially, you know, I'm Palestinian, like I said. The Dome of the Rock is the cornerstone of the Palestinian identity, and it's a very very important to Muslims, and it's especially important to Muslims now that Israel controls Jerusalem. And so it, you know, the whole topic of this is it's very important to Muslims, you know, to know this and to know that Jerusalem, the fact that Jerusalem isn't mentioned in the Quran, the fact
so this
that
would be so this would be another front on revealing the weaknesses and sort of showing that Islam is built on a falsehood.
Yeah, that, and you know, a funny thing about Surah al-Isra, you know, that's where the magic donkey ride supposedly happened. You know, it's also called the Surah of the Israelites, and it's interesting that in Arabic the word Israel, it's very similar to Isra. It almost feels like they just dropped off the name of God, Eid, you know, E-L at the end of it. So, you know, this is, and the fact that surah is all about Moses. You know, it's not all about Moses, but it goes right into Israel. It goes right into to where they think that the servant isn't Muhammad, it is Moses. You know, when it says, you know, asra bi abdihi, the one who went his servant to, you know, the Al-Aqsa, you know, and so it is very relevant to the, but you know, I've even heard Muslim Arab from Al-Azhar University graduates saying Al-Aqsa is not in Jerusalem. Al-Aqsa is in Ja'rana, which is next to Mecca. And Muhammad went there many times. And there actually is a mosque called Al-Aqsa in Ja'rana, you know, which is like 20 miles from Mecca. And where it's like the whole Jerusalem myth connection is a myth. You know, it didn't really, you know, but I was made to look, from what I understood, that Abdul Malik is the one who wanted to create this illusion in order to fortify his connection to, you know, to Islam, and to use a verse of the Quran that mentions Al-Aqsa as a legitimizing the Jerusalem connection. So, you know, it is a very important, and seriously, I mean, it's for Muslims, this is all over the world, including Iran, including the Shiites, and the Jerusalem connection is so important, but it's so weak. It's so important.
So we should do a presentation.
Lloyd, if you would go back to Safaria, and if you open Exodus 24.
Yeah.
Give me one moment. So then we have reason then to get together, plan. I mean, especially with you guys, Odon, Robert, Paul, and even Hussein, and others, to talk about Al-Aqsa, then to basically prepare a presentation, look at the history, look at the Quran, and try to pick that apart. That might be very useful. You know,
yeah. If you go up to texts at the top, text at the top left.
So exit top left, Exodus.
No, Tanakh. You go to Tanakh.
Tanakh.
And then Exodus and 20. You go down to verse 4. Voila. Then click on the 4. Okay. First of all, it says no.
It's 19, not 20.
19.
It's verse 19.
So go back one. Yeah. Sorry,
How do I go?
Just go back to the library, Safaria. Go click there.
It's chapter 19. Eh?
Yeah. Chapter 19, verse 4.
There we go.
4. Yeah. So you've seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and you brought me. Then you go to, you click more at the bottom right, more at the bottom right. And you go to Targum. And you go to Targum Jonathan on Exodus at the bottom, Targum Jonathan. You've seen what I've done to the Egyptians and how I bore you upon the clouds as upon eagle's wings from Pelushin to take you to the place of the sanctuary, there to solemnize the Pesach, and the same night brought you back to Pelusin. From thence have brought you nigh to receive the doctrine of my law.
Wow, that's the donkey ride.
That's the night journey. And the thing is, this explains, because this is during the Exodus of the Israelites, and Moses gets flown to Jerusalem apparently to celebrate Pesach. But the point being here is that if you look at Pelusin, that explains Al-Aqsa, because that is either the most easternmost town of Egypt or the most westernmost town of Israel. It's the furthest synagogue, either which way you look at it. It's at the in extremis. It's at the limits of whichever way you look at it.
That's
the night journey. Night journey here, and you know, there and when you add this to Surah Al-Isra, then it makes perfect sense why the rest of it concerns Moses, because this is a reference to this strip.
Fantastic. Wow.
That is amazing. That is really amazing. And
I have a slight question on this, Robert. Isn't that journey going the wrong way? Because what you want is a journey from the Masjid al-Haram to the Masjid al-Aqsa, but what you've got there is a journey from the Masjid al-Aqsa to the Masjid al-Haram. You've got it's going in the wrong direction, isn't it?
Doesn't matter. They're borrowing the idea. I mean, they'll change it at will, right, as needed.
No. What I mean is, it's the idea of the night journey, where it's exactly going from. Of course.
But I heard that El Barak did not have internal GPS, and that's why it says that Jibril was holding his leash and leading him to Jerusalem. So there could be directionally challenged
in the other direction.
Yeah, if I may point out a couple of things on this, is when in the Quran we see lots of stories where a particular detail is actually wrong. It's almost like deliberately wrong. So it wouldn't surprise me if this is an Easter egg of the guy actually writing this to confuse the population, or rather to tell a Jew that this was copied from the wrong people. But also with the Masjid al-Haram and the Masjid al-Aqsa, that the two stories, the one being Jerusalem and the one being that is a place between Taif and Mecca. What I think happened is, we know that verse was about Moses, so absolutely nothing to do with Islam, absolutely nothing to do with anything really. The chances of a guy called Muhammad in Mecca going to a place called Masjid al-Aqsa that was right there, when we look at the person is Moses, the chances are exactly zero. So what could have happened is people start making up stories of what is this thing. They're trying to make it about Muhammad. They come up with two stories. The one that prevails is the one going all the way to Jerusalem because it's more fantastic and it goes to the heavens, as opposed to he actually just went 5 minutes down the road. That is not fantastic enough. But now we're in the 21st century. People look at that and say the Masjid al-Aqsa was not built during the time of Muhammad. So it could not have been Jerusalem. Oh, let's look at the other story that they told. And now they're going for that. But they were both made up. Some people realized it couldn't be Jerusalem. They created another one. We see this in other stories, such as Moses walking all the way to Mecca. Abraham walking all the way to Mecca with Hagar. And then in other stories, actually he flew in the Burak. We see that they are trying to make it all work with Islam. And in the end, one story becomes prevalent, and when we debunk it historically, because the Masjid al-Aqsa wasn't built until the time of Abdul Malik, then people are looking at the other ones and say, well, okay, Muhammad was there in Mecca and it was nearby. No, the exegesis is clear. It's been 1400 years as Jerusalem. Both stories were just fabricated. And hello, Mel. Very good to see you.
Yes, hello, Mel.
Mel, hey there.
Hey, if I could just If I could just say one last thing, I need to actually go, but I just wanted to say one last thing about the El Burak connection. That Muhammad said that Muhammad also had a very lovely, beloved donkey. His name was Ya'fur, and Muhammad said that he was actually related to the donkey that Jesus rode into Jerusalem on. And so I'm wondering if El Burak might be related to them as well. I don't know, but anyway.
Hussein, I just want to borrow you. Can you just stay on for another 2 minutes?
Sure. Yes.
No, but it's this donkey business. This is what you find in the pseudo-Clementine literature and elsewhere in pre-Islamic stuff. So that this donkey of Abraham is the donkey that all prophets ride. So it's also in some Christian traditions, it's the donkey that Jesus rode in Jerusalem. So you've got this divine donkey parked somewhere, and everybody that gets sent by God rides it, and this is how you know. So when, according to Islamic narrative, Umar enters Jerusalem on a donkey, you see why this tradition arose. It's bears a lot of resemblance to Palm Sunday, but just off the top of my head, Hussein, if you go to Quran, was it 1788? كل راني لالرا الإنسنو والجنو الله أن يعطوا بثمني, and then it's هذا القرآن. How do you interpret that?
Let me just look here real quick. هذا القرآن, this Quran.
But so if you read that, at least in my sense of Arabic, it's referring to another book, not not to the Quran the book that you're actually holding. It's
this particular one, this version.
Yes. You know where I see this. I see this also, the same issue with, I think it's the first verse of Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, where it says, هذه الكتاب. No, ذلك الكتاب, that book. Instead of this book, it says, that book, there is no doubt in it. And it's talking about another book. And so, here it does say, هذه القرآن. Yeah. مثل هذه القرآن. Okay.
But is it the book you're holding, or is it another book? I have the impression this Quran, I mean, they're talking about another book, not.
I see what you're saying. Yes. Yeah. Wow. That's it.
It's not about the Quran. It's about the lectionary.
Yeah, Usama's spoken about this as well, and he agrees with you, Robert, I think. So this is interesting.
No, all that I'm saying, it's not Arabic, as you can probably guess, it's not my native language. So
we should get Murad and Usama on this as well. I think they'd back you up.
So what I'm trying to say is when we have a native speaker, I'm going to let him decide and not myself. So good. So if you confirm that, Hussein, thank you. That's what it's better to have a native speaker confirm it than a smartass like myself.
Well, I'm part smartass too, because I'm really American, but
nobody's
Arabic
perfect.
is like my second language. So, but
okay.
Thank you guys. This was really fun. I learned a lot, you guys. Really awesome stream. Thank you so much for letting me on.
Thanks, man.
God bless you guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, and again, on the same, this was from Adam Seeker, that the Quran actually begins like this, where it says, Dalik al-Kitab. And even here, Al-Jalalain says, that, meaning this book.
That means this means that.
Have we lost Smell?
Yeah, we did.
We never got a chance to hear from him.
Yeah, until he comes back.
It was nice to have somebody with a real Irish accent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
No, Hussein he's very strong on apologetics, and he understands the Arabic mind. I think his mother is Palestinian or something. No, his mother's Catholic, and his father's like so he's a mixture. But he's been violently attacked for discussing the Bible and the Quran. So I mean he's been out there in the trenches, so he knows the value of what we're discussing here. He's a very smart guy.
Yeah. But what I wanted to say, Paul, just going back to what you were saying, so I think one has to look at it in several stages, because there is first the Quran becomes.
Mel is back with us.
Welcome back, Mel.
Oh, Mel. The Quran is at the first stage. It has an authoritative book. So how and when it became canonized, if that's the correct term, if it's not too much borrowing from Christianity, is another question.
Yeah.
Because also, if you look at the Islamic tradition, they kind of all of these traditions that go to Uthman, you find also going to Abu Bakr. And it's this story with Afsa, who's got the Quran as in a shoebox under her bed, and Hassan ibn Thabit says, "Yeah, I wrote a copy, and Hafsa has it now." And and they go and get Hafsa, and says, "Yeah, but I want it back. It's the only thing I have of my husband's." And "Oh, yeah, you'll get it back when we're finished." But they assume that this thing was always one text. So how much canonicism? But then I think there is a third stage you have to add there, Paul, and that is the exegesis, or rather the eisegesis of the Quranic text, which developed over time. Because even if you read the tafsir, even Tabari, who, as far as I know, the tafsir is only preserved in one manuscript, so that means that it probably wasn't that popular a text. I think it's more, especially Nöldeke in his Geschichte des Koran says, yeah, if I can live to see, them finding a copy, and then it was later, shortly after, published by Derenburg in France. But he's all over the map, and I always have the feeling that with the Mufassirun, that their primary goal is the Asbab an-Nuzul, the circumstances of the revelation, and not so much what the text actually may or may not mean. But I think the exegesis is at yet a later stage. So I think that there is at some stage a Quran, and why? Where does it come from? We don't know. But I think if you're going to start a religion in late antiquity, you basically need a book.
Right.
Because you see the Persians, they also start in early late antiquity writing texts down that have been transmitted orally for a long time. I think that's partly Christian influence, because you need a book to be a religion. Look at L. Ron Hubbard. He wanted to get rich and started a religion, so he wrote Dianetics.
Oh, Joseph Smith. Also.
Joseph Smith, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So after Christianity, you needed because this whole idea of al-kitab, of the book religions, or people of the book, or what have you, it's a bit of a weird notion, because especially coming from a people without books.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mel, welcome. Been a while.
It's a pleasure to join you. Unfortunately, I haven't been able for a good while, but I wanted to talk about Surah 17. I know some of you have chipped in on it. I did a little bit of investigation into it a few days ago, and I asked the question, okay, if it's talking about the Fardas Masjid, presumably it's talking about a synagogue. So what does the Talmud talk about as the Fardas synagogue? And it talks about the synagogues going out from Jerusalem. And if you get out to Nahardia and Mahosa, that's where you find the farthest synagogues from Jerusalem. So my interpretation of it is very different, which is it's talking about the night journey of the Shekinah returning from Jerusalem after the death of Nehemiah bin Huziel back to where it normally existed, which is in the academies. So a totally different take on it.
But Dan Gibson also has a totally different one, pitching a mosque somewhere in Jordan, I believe. So in Quranic geography.
Possibly, yeah. Yeah. So that's my little take. I think when you look through the Talmud, I think, and if you find a straightforward solution, I tend to prefer that than just using fits of imagination, you know.
Right. Odon, you look quite
to have convinced Robert.
Yeah, I know, not at all. But Odon, you seem to be very intrigued by Hussein's mentions related to the Dome of the Rock. I mean, that seemed to pique your interest.
On this topic, I would have something to say. I don't think that the building of the Dome of the Rock was to divert the pilgrimage from Mecca, because Mecca did not exist at the time. I don't think also, like Paul said, that it was a sort of monument dedicated to the return of Jesus, because this monument already existed before. It was the third temple that was rebuilt around 638, 640. And I think it endured more or less up until Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't it abandoned until relatively recently? It was completely abandoned and forgotten. And then when it became a thorn in the side of Israel, then it became a political hot point and an important shrine in Muslim, theology.
And I was up there. Yeah, I was on the Dome of the Rock. I was on the Temple Mount this Christmas, this December, and I can say it's still horribly neglected. You still find litter all over the place, and not just dropped sweet wrappers or something. You've got broken furniture, old mattresses. It's in an absolutely terrible state. I mean, I venerate this place just because of its importance. And I would go up there if I lived in Jerusalem. I'd go there with some bin liners and just try and tidy the place up. Wow. But everywhere you go, you've got these burly, unfriendly-looking Muslim guys who say, "Oh, you're not allowed here, you're not allowed there," and they're just throwing their weight around, saying you're not allowed to go into the stables of Solomon, or you're not allowed to go in. They wouldn't even let me go into or the gatehouse, not even allowed to go into the museum, even though the only thing that the museum holds is Byzantine stuff. And it's just but it's all about bullying. None of it is about actually showing respect to the site, because all these people could easily, just go out and pick up one bit of litter a day, and it would simply tidy again.
So it's just a political club.
Well, you have this because there's an interesting little German book. I have to find it, but it's somewhere disappeared in my library. So it needs a while, but by Werner Kaskel written in the early '60s for a club in North Rhine-Westphalia, and they were renovating it then. And as Hussein says, it's only become a hotbed since the '67 war. Of course, when the Jordanians ran it, how many Jews were allowed to go to the Wailing Wall? So it's another point one has to remember. But the point being that Kaskel mentions that it was being renovated in the '60s by Italian marble craftsmen. So there were Italian marble craftsmen inside there going out it. And of course, because one of the things that you now have the footprints of Muhammad there when he went to the Isra. And there, of course, these are a copy of the Church of the Ascension, where supposedly you've the footprints of Jesus when at the Ascension. But there is one pilgrim. So there's a book by Richard Hartmann, written 1909. I have it somewhere, but I have to find it again. I'll have to do some excavating in my study. But where I think it's the Anonymous of Nuremberg, but I might be mistaken. But he says it's in the Middle Ages, and he says when you go to Jerusalem, you should also see the Dome of the Rock, even though it's Muslim. But there you have the footprints of Jesus in it. So something's been happening there. I'm not sure what, but at some stage along the way, they became the footprints of Muhammad. But but because one also has to remember that in the Islamic tradition, the Isra and the Miraj are two separate stories, and it's only really much later, especially if I remember correctly, around the time of Saladin with the reconquest of Jerusalem, that they're both merged together into one tip. That he takes the non-stop night flight from Mecca to Jerusalem, and then goes up to heaven from there, which is, of course, because the story is still rather awkward, because of Mecca is the first sanctuary built by Adam. Why couldn't you go to heaven from Mecca? Why did you have to go to Jerusalem? So,
yeah,
because you see they're trying to add on Jerusalem to the sacred geography, to part of the system, because and as I said, the two stories are only combined much later. I'm trying to see where I have it should be here somewhere, but I can't find it. But anyway, but they're both combined rather late, and it's in the around the period of Saladin. And therefore, you get the impression that Saladin's theologians are borrowing especially from the Jews, okay, give us 10 reasons why Jerusalem is important. Why do we need to reconquer it? Because you get the impression that there wasn't a lot of animo among his soldiers to reconquer Jerusalem.
Yeah, they need a story.
Yeah. You need a story. And it's also important for us, and this is where Muhammad went to.
Yeah, we have a question from Frame Sistich 988. And thank you for the €2. She says, why did the Abbasids keep the Judaic stuff like no pork, circumcision? I guess they thought they were in the Jewish camp, right? That they were part of the original inheritors of the tradition from Allah.
Well, there's also another explanation.
They were the new Moses, right?
Yes, but there's also I think a non Judaic explanation that there was a pork taboo among Semites beforehand, and also, for example, circumcision was widely practiced, with the ancient Egyptians and the Berbers and what have you. It was a rather common rite.
But it would also be a way to distinctly separate them from the Christians who had a different set of laws given to them.
Yeah, but for example, when you read Josephus, one of his proofs that the Arabs, so we talked about this some weeks ago, that this notion that the Ismail is the patriarch of the Arabs largely goes back to Josephus with his Antiquities of the Jews, and basically, to oversimplify it a bit, but what Josephus says is, look, according to the Genesis, Ishmael was about 13 years old when Abraham made the covenant with God. And look at the Arabs, and these are the heathen Arabs, the time of Josephus. These are the pagan Arabs, let's say. And they circumcise when they're 13 because it's a rite de passage, of course. And so Josephus, who's using Greek ethnography, pardon?
Mal just disappeared.
Okay. But Josephus, who's using Greek ethnography to prove that the Hebraic culture is the oldest, but he says, look, this is the proof that the Arabs are the descendants of Ishmael because they get circumcised at the same age as Ishmael did. So one doesn't necessarily need it to be a direct Judaic influence. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Yehudu Nevo talks about a sect called the Abrahamists that pre-existed Islam, and they had very much similar customs. How big a sect they were, I don't know, but they practice eating just pork and things, or not eating pork and similar things you find in Judaism.
Well, because pork, so if you look at, even in ancient Greek religion, and there's a certain amount of shared culture, in the Bronze Age and earlier in the Eastern Mediterranean. You see this in the vocabulary partly, tauros and thawr in Arabic for the bull, shor in Hebrew, and karan, horn, with cornus in Latin, which is in Greek, but and wine, yain in Hebrew, and phoinos in ancient Greek, with a digama. So there's a certain overlap. And if you look at the story of Demeter and Kore or Persephone, when she gets, Hades takes a liking to her, and it's a story you also find in Mesopotamia with Inanna's descent to the netherworld. Somewhat different, but when the Greek goddess comes out in the spring to keep Hades company, they sacrifice a pig, and he's put on a pole, and he's lowered into a cavern under the temple. And what's interesting, there's two words megara in Greek. You've got pro megara, which is in Homer the royal palace. It's now in Greece the presidential palace, and you've got e megara, which is a Semitic loanword. It goes back to ma'ara in Hebrew and ma'ara in Arabic, and with the Rhine, and which means a cave. And the oldest Greek temples had was a fissure underground, and later they built a basement. But it seems to be a Semitic rite, and then you could propose, and what's his name in the 19th century did that, the big British historian of religion, I can't remember.
James?
Pardon?
Henry James?
No, not Henry James.
It wasn't Henry James or one of those guys? No.
One of those guys, but he wrote this volume about religion and the history of humanity. I should remember it, but anyway. But his proposal was that because the pig was the only animal that was sacrificed entirely to the deity, this is where the taboo comes from. It wasn't that it was unclean or anything. And I saw a comment pass by, no, well, full circumcision, well, how do you half circumcise? It's not something I do regularly, but the point...
There is something on circumcision. It's supposed to be some kind of reversible thing in the Bible because it can be concealed. There are ways of restoring the stuff. And I've heard a scholar saying that it might have been not a full circumcision, but only an incision. So something that could have been, that could be healed.
Okay, well, but either which way, the point is that the difference with the Jews seems to be the age when it's done. So with the Jews, it's done on the 7th day, and with the Arabs, and if we take the testimony of Josephus here, it seems to be a rite passage, and John Van Cedars proposed a number of years ago that the Jews, their innovation was to move it from a rite passage at puberty to a rite passage at birth. But
also throw in one wild card, and that's of course Elijah Ballas, who also was circumcised and didn't eat pork, and no one knows quite what he was all about or where he fits into anything.
Yeah, well, he probably wasn't Jewish or Christian or.
So, may I add something just briefly on that as well? That the earliest yes, about the pork. That in the account of Sebios, he says that these Muhammad merchants who became prominent, he forbade them to eat carrion and drink wine and speak falsehood. He doesn't actually mention pork. So it's actually possible that simply they copied so much from the Talmud and from Jewish legends and things like that, that it ended up in the Quran, like they couldn't actually eat the meat of swine. And then, because it's in the book, they got to a point where they just couldn't edit it out, because the people who edited the Quran in the end, they didn't really care about who was the original Muhammad. They were making everything up. But maybe they were simply stuck with that verse because they had copied so much from the Talmud and stuff, they couldn't just change it using diacritics. So maybe it was just they were stuck with it.
I think on a wider thing, the main reason for the influence of Judaism on Islam under the Abbasids is where the center of power was in Baghdad. It's the obvious. The Abbasids were a stone's throw away from the Jewish academies, so of course they're going to be strongly influenced by the culture. And they also saw themselves as very closely related, religious-wise as well.
And yet, Mel, the Abbasids put forward the narrative that we now have, which totally rules Jerusalem out of the story. The Abbasids were basically responsible, as far as the way I read it, responsible for Ibn Ishaq and all that, and everything else that came after him, that denies the Jerusalem connection and puts everything down in Mecca and tries to minimize everything. So it's curious.
I think as I'm discovering from a person called Amir recently, that an awful lot of the early writings in the 8th century was deeply encoded with a temple outlook. The coding was misunderstood centuries later, and the references to Jerusalem wasn't obvious. I think it's very hard at this stage to determine when the move to Mecca happened. So without a clear idea of when the transition, it's very hard to make interpretations.
Yeah, we've got nearly 2.5 hours, so should we wrap up in the next few minutes with our closing thoughts?
Okay.
I just wanted to say there was a thing about Adam's coffin going onto the ark with Noah. You also find that in Tabari. It's not just Shiite legends. You find that in Tabari's. But okay.
Odon, you wanted to say?
It depends whether you want to wrap up now or if you give me 1 minute.
I'm easy. No, take your time. Make a comment.
About the Jewish influence and why did it sort of keep on with the Abbasids? I think it's during the Abbasids that the late stage, the late stage of the Islamic theology is invented. That Islam is supposed to replace Christianity, which was supposed to replace Judaism, and so on. So Islam is supposed to be the ultimate religion, and the first religion was sort of Judaism. So Islam has to assume Judaism and the Jewish law, sort of. It cannot be completely different from Judaism. And so I think this idea of revelations that replace each other, which came at a late stage during the formation of Islam, it's one of the reasons why the Abbasid kept on with Jewish customs that make no sense within Islam. Anyway, it's my take on this.
No, it's so because you have this. It's called, in Israeliyat, which is the in the Abbasid Caliphate, they borrow large scale from them also to understand the Quran.
Yeah.
So it's rather well known, this Israeliyat, that because if you read the Quran and with the biblical content, we were just talking about Noah, but if with the deluge, if you just have the Quran to go on, you don't really understand much of the story.
Yeah. So guys, last thing. Since Hussein mentioned that the Dome of the Rock is a bone of contention for them, but also a weakness. I mean, we may want to then focus on that going forward in the future as a potential area to do some historical research tied to the Quran and other issues and unravel that a little bit. And of course, so Odon, we never really got to your interpolations thing, but I think we've had a fantastic conversation nonetheless. We'll definitely get back to that. And then Jay Smith has agreed to join us on Tuesday. Yes, Robert?
No, we can do it next Wednesday or whenever.
Great, yeah. And then, of course, Jay Smith has agreed to join us on Tuesday. So it'll be great if we can all be available. Those of us who are, especially Odon and Robert, because I thought that would be a great conversation, and Paul as well. And Mal, if you're around, of course. So,
I'd love to. Yeah.
Usama arranged that with Jay, and of course, maybe in the future we'll have Robert. What's his name? Come on, it's Robert Spencer. Yeah, and potentially we might have who's the other scholar?
Gabriel Reynolds.
Yeah, Gabriel C. Reynolds. Yeah, that may happen. But look, let's look at Tuesday and definitely pick it up.
Okay.
And then Wednesday we'll be back. So yeah, that'll be interesting. But this has been a fascinating conversation. I mean, I love where it's all going. And
so with the Dome of the Rock, just to conclude then, because the big problem is what is the Dome of the Rock? Because if you look at the architecture, it's clearly a martyrion from the form with the dome. And, this goes back to the Golden Dome of Nero. And but it's essentially a Christian type of church building, usually over something sacred, probably the rock. And No. But what I mean is, that has a dome built over Mary, but the Assumption of Mary, I think you call it in English. And the point being it's over a sacred space or a grave or something. So the question is, how do you define the Dome of the Rock architecturally? So it's whatever it is, it's certainly not a mosque.
Not a mosque, correct. Yeah, so it's worth discussing further. So guys,
even nowadays, when they pray outside on the esplanade in front of it.
You're right.
Guys, I'm sorry, but I really have to leave now.
Yeah, guys, we went.
We're waiting. So see you soon. Next Tuesday, next Wednesday. Bye-bye.
So let's call it then.
Murdy.
So yeah, guys, let's call it a day. It's been 2.5 hours. I think it's been fantastic. So we'll be back.
Yep.
We'll pick it up again.
Okay. Right. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Take care. Okay.